Yes, fine, thank you. Yeah, very good.
Good, wonderful.
With my grandson, my youngest grandson.
Oh, very nice.
He's a brilliant musician. So I've got a piano here, and he's got his electric drum kit here. So because he can't really practice at home, they all complain.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think we're ready to begin if you are, Graham. Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah. So let's make a start. So just going to say welcome to everybody that's joined us for this evening, either live on Zoom or watching us later via YouTube. I'm very happy to be joined by Graham Hartstone, who's worked on countless films in the sound department, more Bond films than I think can be counted. Films like Blade Runner, Eyes Wide Shut, Aliens. Is there any other credits, Graham, that you would like to mention at this point?
I really enjoyed working with David Lean on Passage to India. Yeah.
We might mention that as we go along. So
sure.
Just put a little note of that. Okay. So basically, this evening is going to be a conversation with myself and I about Graham's wonderful career. But before we get into that, I'm delighted to say that we can be joined for a little extended cameo by Mr. Norman Wanstall, who was a sound editor for 6 Bond films, including the remake of Thunderball, Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery. And Norman also won the Oscar for sound effects on Goldfinger. So we're delighted to be joined by Norman this evening. I'm just going to bring Norman on, and then we'll have a little chat amongst ourselves. Okay.
Good.
All right, so we should pop on in a moment. Okay, I'm just going to ask Norman to start his audio and his video.
Hi, Norman.
Just I can't hear you yet, Norman. Just ask you to start your audio.
Mute.
I can hear you now, Norman.
Okay, brilliant.
Hi.
So
hi, Norman. We haven't met for a while. We have our Sprocketeers lunches, don't we? Occasionally that you're able to make, and you'll be glad to know they're starting up again. I can't make the first one, but they will be starting up again.
Well, I saw one from Rick the other day saying that they were going to hold one, and it's just too far for me to go, so probably I'll miss out this time.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can make one maybe in the summer.
Oh yeah, no, I can always stay with Colin Miller, and I just can't believe that we worked on all those films together and we never really met up once, did we?
Not really, no, because I mean, when you were doing all and winning all the awards for the post-production, I was still on production at Pinewood. And then by the time I got into post-production and working on Bond films, you had left the industry, I think.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah.
Were you a permanent member of the Pinewood staff?
Yeah, for 45 years, yes.
No, I thought you were, because I was looking at all the different sound recordists on the different Bonds. Your name comes up every time, but the actual recordists vary from film to film.
Sure.
And I can't understand why they didn't use the Pinewood sound recordist.
Well, I don't think Mac did the early ones, did he? And I think Colin LeMessurier did Russia with Love. Is that possible?
Well, I've got Wally Milner did Dr. No.
All right, yes.
John Mitchell did Russia with Love, who I'll never forget, John Mitchell. Yes. Dudley Messenger was on Goldfinger.
Right. Yeah, well, I spent some time on the set on Goldfinger. Again, I mean, when we were Pinewood staff, especially the junior members, we were just shifted around wherever we were needed. And I remember spending a few days on Goldfinger when they attacked when they went into the Fort Knox. That was up near Black on the Lot.
Right.
Fort Knox was
Yes.
built. Yeah. So I spent a few days on that there. I was the boom operator at a very young age for artist tests on From Russia with Love.
Oh, okay.
And we were testing, I can't remember her name now, but she was in bed with nothing on except a little black band around her neck. I couldn't believe it at 18 years old. I'm doing this. And I put my boom in as I'd been taught religiously above the bed, ready for while Ted Moore spent, I don't know, probably 3 hours lighting this shot. And there were shadows everywhere. And I thought, well, I wasn't brave enough to say, you know, can we help that? Can we do that with the mic shadow? And then all of a sudden, Ted said, okay, ready to go. And you can take that out of there.
No, yeah, great stories. Great stories. It's interesting to see your name on every single one. And yet the actual recordist changed. And I didn't know why they didn't use a Pinewood guy like yourself, you see.
Well, I mean, when you mean the floor recorder, the production recordist, you mean?
Yes. I mean,
I was involved with all until I got until I was into the dubbing theatre to be actually on the final mix of, I don't know which one was Man with the Golden Gun or you only the Paul McCartney one. What was that one? Anyway, that's when I got first into the dubbing theatre with Ken. But before that, I was either involved in the Foley Theatre or in the transfer bay. I spent hours in the transfer bay on Thunderball because they just shot these enormously long takes. They never seemed to turn the recorder off, and we had to print them, and the camera speed was varying because of the heat. And I had in the transfer, you had to chase the speed of the camera to keep it in sync. But most of it was completely useless anyway. So.
Right. Well, being permanent staff, you obviously got moved around. That's obvious.
Indeed. Yeah.
Does Maurice Askew mean anything to you?
Well, he mixed. Which one did he mix? He mixed
Press File.
File. Yeah.
And Pete Davis. Who was Pete Davis?
Peter Davis was a production mixer who was seconded for quite sometimes for to Pinewood. He moved in latter years to Switzerland, and I got on very well with Peter. In fact, he was brave enough to let me be a boom operator on at a very young age on a couple of early pictures. And I kept up with Peter right up until his death.
Did you? The obvious question to ask you is: did you go on location with all these pictures?
Well, my first locations, I did. My first location was down on Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines when we went to Folkestone, stayed in Folkestone to shoot at Dover. I went to the south of France and Monaco for Kaleidoscope, which was a Warren Beatty and Susanna York film.
Did the Bonds take you away, or did you have to remain behind?
No, I was never that much on a production crew of a Bond. I mean, I was on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang for a year of my life. I took a day off on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang to get married, believe it or not.
But you had a great career, though. I mean, some of the credits, amazing.
Yeah, very privileged. Yeah.
So now you're out of it. And
I'm teaching at the National Film and Television School as a guest tutor. I was in there yesterday, seeing through some of the final graduation films, 1-to-1, which I thoroughly enjoy.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully we're going to meet up again and we can toss a few more items around between us.
I'm sure we will. I look forward to when you can make it up for us Sprocketeers one summer day, I hope.
Yes, indeed. Yes, John Mitchell was the one that I remember most, because on Rush with Love, you probably know, he actually put a hat on and became a member of the boat crew so that he could record out of vision.
Right.
Quite remarkable. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, my history with John is quite interesting, because the first film I ever worked on, when I took the job as a cable monkey at Pinewood, was on Waltz the Toreadors with John Mitchell. And I had at that time just been taken on at Pinewood, but I'd also applied to Beaconsfield, where, of course, John was the head of sound there. He was loaned out to Pinewood. Yeah.
I didn't know
So
that.
he was the head of sound, and he said, well, I've got your application here for Beaconsfield as well. He said, but I'll have to go and ask Cyril Crowhurst if he thinks you've got a future at Pinewood, because I wouldn't poach you away. So he did, and Cyril fortunately said, well, no, Graham's got a future here. But I went on then, I spent a year with John Mitchell on Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, and then another year on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Oh, wow.
So, we stuck together for quite a while. And the big loop came when we were both nominated for A Passage to India. And, if we had won, I had my little speech saying that, having worked with John on my first job, it was great to be back with him, on this platform. But
yeah, I had one last little story is on Russia with Love. I won't take up all your time, but it's very interesting from a sound point of view. When as you know, we had the boats, these very high-speed boats, and when he got back, he said to me, I think we ought to sit together and listen to my tapes. And I couldn't believe it. There was a pile of tapes this size. And he said, I thought you would need plenty of sound on the boats. I said, oh, gosh, what a gift. I forget what they were called now. They're very high power machines. Anyway, cut a long story short, we started to run them, and they sounded like vacuum cleaners. And having worked on other Bond films, I thought, well, unfortunately, that's not quite what we have in Bond films. We have roars and...
Probably got to add a motorbike.
And I never told him, but unfortunately, we couldn't use them. Yeah. After all that work.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't want to take up your time. It's been great to have a chat, and hopefully we'll meet soon.
Good. I hope so, Norman.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Cheers, Philip.
I'll be back in the audience.
Right, yes, back in the audience now.
If you wanted to pop on again at any point, if we start talking about something that you want to contribute to, just put your hand up and I'll put you back out on. But,
okay, bless you.
But if not, I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
In the near future, yeah.
Okay.
Well done, Graham.
Cheers, Norman.
Cheers. Wouldn't have missed that.
Take care, Norm.
Cheers.
Should disappear in a second. There we go. Okay, perfect. So yeah, it's always nice to chat and see Norm. So you did share a few projects together. We mentioned Ipcress File. What were some of the? Do you have any specific, other than what you already mentioned, any memories of Ipcress File that you want to share?
The Ipcress File, not really on that one. The more interesting was Funeral in Berlin. Oh,
right, yeah.
Which I think it was fairly unusual, but we had two film units shooting in Berlin at the same time. The Funeral in Berlin and the Quiller Memorandum. So I was on the Quiller Memorandum sound crew, and our soundtrack driver stroke interpreter, which we didn't really need because everybody spoke English anyway, but he said he fixed me up with a blind date with his landlady's daughter, right. Which I duly went along with, and 5 grandchildren and 54 years later, the rest is history.
Yeah. And I suppose being based predominantly at Pinewood, you didn't perhaps have to have the same issues that a lot of people work in the film business, where you could be in one country after the other and it's moving around a lot. You have pretty much sort of
we were pretty much in, other than going on location. My first location was on the island of Crete, which was nothing like it is today. There was no tourist industry there at all then. On the Walt Disney Film the Moon Spinners, where I actually met Walt Disney and had some discussions with him, which were interesting. So that was my first location. And then I went to, as I say, we went to Granada on the Long Jewel, where we shot in the Sierra Nevada, pretending to be India. Kaleidoscope, which I mentioned, in the south of France, where I lost my petty cash in the casino. I went in there. I thought, well, you can't go to Monte Carlo without playing in the casino. No. And the rest of the sound crew weren't really interested in playing, so they subbed me as well, you know. And so I sat down and I played roulette. But I thought, well, half an hour, that's no fun. So I spent the rest losing it all.
Well, yeah, as you say, you've got to do these things while you're there, certainly.
Yes.
Another project that you and Norman would have worked on together was Call Me Buana, which was also produced by Craig Brockley.
Yes.
Any reflections from?
Well, yeah. Again, it was one of those times when I was briefly on the set as an assistant for Call Me Buana, and the boom operator on that was a guy called Roy Charman, who sort of took me under my wing when I went. He was a sound camera operator, but originally, but then was a boom operator on Call Me Buana, and he took me under his wing and booked me extra time on my timesheet and everything, things that I wasn't necessarily expecting. And we went on, and much later in life, he went freelance, but much later in life, we were nominated together for Aliens. Right. So we met up again there. But I do remember a time on Call Me Buana, which is a little anecdote, really. Roy was a little bit short-sighted. And I remember an occasion where he had the boom, which was a big old Mole Richardson boom, a big heavy thing, racked right out to its full extent above Bob Hope and Anita Ekberg, would it have been, I think? Yeah. And it was above there. And he got down from the boom to go nearer to see if he was in the right position. And when he climbed back on the boom, the boom locking device sort of wasn't tight enough, and the microphone fell crash right down between them. Yeah. Luckily, it didn't hit either of them, but I can remember that.
Yeah, it's quite close. Cool. You mentioned Commercial of Love and being involved in the screen test. Were you then at any point on the actual film, or? No,
not for the rest of it that I can remember. I can remember we saw all of the training set in the gardens at Pinewood, but I wasn't actually back on that at that time.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive sequence, isn't it, in the Pinewood Gardens and doubling for an exotic island. And I think a lot of buying that there was, an exotic location was down to Norman in terms of picking up all the selling it from a sound point of view.
Sure.
You mentioned being on the set of Goldfinger and seeing. So, what was it like seeing the Fort Knox? Did you actually go into the exterior set, or was it the exterior?
Well, the exterior was really only a facade. I think obviously the interior of Fort Knox was in a stage, but the facade outside was. I remember we were doing a shot where Sean Connery as James Bond was being taken in there in the back of a Land Rover along this road that they built to lead up to the front of Fort Knox. Mm-hmm. And the thing I remember about that is, maybe not to his credit, but the Land Rover stopped suddenly, and he was handcuffed to the back of the Land Rover, as I recall, and he hurt his wrist, and he did enough create a fuss.
I mean, have you experienced many actors that made? I mean, not say it's Sean Connery was demanding, but experienced actors that were very much prima donnas, or do you find most people were fairly down to earth?
Yeah, no, most of them are prima donnas. You tend to remember the ones that were more down to earth. I really enjoyed working with Patrick Mcgowan. He was a gentleman, and I remember even the junior little me got a Christmas present from him, you know, which was nice. Yeah, there are surprising, some of them, like some of them are quite shy. Alec Guinness was very shy. On Quilla Memorandum, George Siegel, who sort of came quite recently revived in the TV thing with the family program, what's it called? The Goldbergs. He was the grandfather, yeah. But he was lovely, absolutely lovely, yeah, lovely person. Who else can I think of that was nice? There aren't that many, I'm afraid.
Roger Moore, perhaps?
Oh yes, of course, Roger. He was a charmer. Yeah, he was a charmer and a joker, and there was nobody who couldn't like Roger Moore. And all the Carry On crews, the Carry On actors, they were that was a real like fun team to work on. It really was.
And do you have any other memories of Sean Connery, or was that the main one that springs to mind?
No, the last time I worked with him was I didn't mix the final film, but I did some rough mixes of preview mixes of Entrapment.
Oh yes.
That's the last time I saw him. Yeah, and I think he came in to view them, but yeah, he was fine. Oh, I do have one. What was the story now? We were shooting or recording ADR, dialogue recording at Pinewood for A Bridge Too Far, perhaps, I think. And Sean Connery was supposed to be coming in, and Dickie Attenborough got this message to say that Sean Connery's car had broken down. And so Dickie said, well, take my car and go and pick him up. So I got in Dickie's Rolls Royce with his driver, and we went off to this house where Sean had actually, where he'd broken down, he'd gone into this house, knocked on the door and told the woman he'd broken down. What she thought of having James Bond knock on her door, I don't know. She probably said, well, why don't you use the phone in your shoe? Anyway, he phoned from there, and that's how I went to pick him up. So that was the only other time I really got involved. We picked him up in Dickie's Rolls and took him back to do the voice recording on Bridge Too Far.
Yeah. We mentioned we've worked a couple of times with director Guy Hamilton. Any memories of Guy Hamilton, and would directors have much of an input into what you were kind of doing?
No, well, the directors do certainly have when we do the final mixing. I don't recall much about Guy Hamilton before, other than, well, from my wife that I met in Berlin when she was on a funeral in Berlin. She had a small part, and she quite liked him. So.
Oh, good. So I wanted to ask you, what made you want to get into the film business to begin with, and how did you go about that journey?
Well, I actually wanted to be an architect. My dad was a surveyor. I've always loved building and architecture, and I studied at school. I studied building drawing, technical drawing, and building construction, and did very well at it. But then when it came to move on to further education, I realized that I actually wasn't very good at taking exams. I was not very good at that. The other thing I used to involve with, which was through my family, my parents and my aunt and uncle, was amateur dramatics back then, where I was backstage. They tried desperately to get me on the stage, but I wasn't interested. And I used to do the lighting on these shows. And there was one show we were doing, and I was backstage with a couple of guys who happened to be, one was in Ealing Sound Department, Ealing Studio Sound, and the other was at Pinewood. And I suddenly said, you know, maybe would quite like to do this in the film industry. I said, maybe I will apply to be an electrician. And they said, no, you don't want to be an electrician. Go in the sound department, So I did. I applied, as I said before, to Pinewood and Shepperton, and was taken on at Pinewood. And once again, the rest is history. I just loved it. I know I was being paid probably a couple of pounds a week more than my contemporaries who'd left school and gone into more, I don't know, what would you call them, regular jobs. And I was just having a ball. I loved it. Who wouldn't? And the rest of my career at Pinewood was like that. I just loved going to work every day to make movies.
Yeah.
And paid for it.
You've been at Pinewood starting from the 60s, then 70s, 80s, and 90s. Was there like a golden age at Pinewood as far as you was concerned in your career?
Well, as far as my career is concerned, we certainly, I worked on quite a number of films without credit because we just didn't get credits in those days. Even the only one mixer on the final mix got credit, the lead mixer. So the first film I got a credit on was Superman the movie, and that was probably quite a big important part of my career. I not only got my first credit, but we were nominated for an Oscar and went off to Los Angeles and did all that, which was wonderful, actually, fantastic.
And what were some of the complexities in doing Superman, because it was very much a groundbreaking film?
Sorry?
Was there any complexities, complications when it came to Superman, given its groundbreaking achievements?
Well, it was an enormous project which had a vast amount of sound effects to deal with, and what we had to do was we got all these tracks in from different sound editors. Some would be doing electronics, some would be doing footsteps, some would be doing cars. Every aspect was done by a different sound editor. And I remember the interesting thing was that when it came to something as simple as a light switch, every editor gave a bit of their in. There was the original light switch on the set, which was probably no good. There was a library light switch that had been fitted by somebody, and there was a bit more wacky light switch that somebody had booked. Then there was an electronic light switch that the electronic guy had put in. So we spent quite a lot of time just trying to sort out a combination of these various different sounds that would make a suitable light switch for a Superman movie. It sounds silly, but we went through all that.
How about some more fantastical things like the Fortress of Solitude and sort of the more grand sort of set pieces?
Well, we had a great sound editor, supervising sound editor, Chris Greenham, who presented some fantastic tracks. And he was in charge of all the other sound editing editors who were presenting stuff. And so we had to put all that together. One thing interesting was that Dick Donner he was very at the beginning, he was insistent that there wouldn't be any sort of a whoosh for Superman flying. So, we as sound people didn't believe, if we were to believe a man could fly, he had to be given some sort of sound to it. So I spent a bit of time with my other sound effects mixer. We would take a sound and we would sweep through like the frequencies so that it could go whoosh or whoosh. And that we did virtually every time he flew. So that was our big contribution.
And I think a very important one as well, when you watch the film, it gives them the sense of movement and of
Sure.
movement, definitely.
We got Dick Donner around to accept it, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So you mentioned the carry-ons. What was because I believe, despite their success, they were very low-budget films produced, shot very, very quickly. What are your main memories of carry-ons?
Well, yeah, they were. But first of all, as I said before, I think it was like a family. The actors were all the same, and Jerry Thomas and Peter Rogers, obviously, and probably a lot of the other crew were the same, the camera crew and everything. So just like a family get together every time. They were got to a very much a formula very efficiently, because Jerry was an editor before he was a director. So he only shot what we needed. If we did an establishing shot, it was traditional that to play the whole scene in case you want to come back to it. But Jerry knew what he was going to use, so he would cut. He would start shooting the establishing shot of the scene, and he'd say, "Cut." That's all I need. So he was very efficient at shooting stuff. He had excellent editor, Alfie Room, for the early stuff. Who knew exactly what was wanted. We didn't in those early days, which is quite interesting. We never got involved with any previews or audience reaction things, which sort of came along a lot later.
Yeah.
I think the Norman Wisdom films we would take the Norman Wisdom films to a cinema, and the producer and director, Ralph, whoever it was, or would sit in the back and just observe the audience's reactions and maybe make some slight edits, according to how the laughs went.
And so you found those previews quite helpful. It didn't dilute in any way what you were trying to achieve, too many cooks, or you felt it?
No, they were just great fun. It was just wonderful. I'm being paid for it too. I used to. I got on very well with Kenny Williams. He never made any sort of approaches to me, although I was quite a pretty boy, but he certainly never did. But we used to play card games and stuff in the waiting times. He was a great guy, and he was forever showing off. I mean, he complex character, but he was forever showing off.
I suppose comedians find it very difficult to switch off and perhaps show themselves. So I take it that was the same with Kenneth Williams.
Yeah, I think he was probably acting all the time. When you read about his, his real personal life and his depressive state, he was just acting all the time. Bless him.
Yeah. And how about Sid James?
Sorry?
I was wondering about Sid James.
Sid James, yeah, I remember Sid James. He was just, exactly as he's in the films. I remember he spent a lot of time on the phone to his bookie. And there were assignations going on which I knew nothing about at the time.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's been some good documentaries since, haven't there, about the Cohen world and certain things that happened.
Yeah. And Peter Rogers was great. I mean, almost until his death, I used to have meet up with Peter and have lunch with him sometimes. And he had his various celebrations at Pinewood, because he was considered part of the furniture at Pinewood. Bless him. Yeah. And when he died, he left all his fortune to the CTBF, the charity for film technicians, which is quite amazing.
I mean, did the budgets in the Carry-On films increase, or was it all?
No, they were just always the same. I think.
To the, like Peter Rogers, would they think, well, hang on a minute, we're not being recognised perhaps for what we're doing? Well,
I think there are stories, and I think we knew some of it. If any of the actors got out of line and said, we're not doing this without you paying me more money, then they would not be in the next one. That was what happened. Though you can't quote me, but I think that that's why we had Frankie Howard in Carry On Up the Jungle and not Kenneth Williams.
Yeah. So I had a question come in. Today, there are many complaints about some TV shows were having some sound issues. So it seems that, dialogue and effects, is that a mixing issue, or do you think, what do you think causes these?
There are two causes. One is direction, making sure that the lines are delivered intelligibly. You can't really blame the production mixer on the sets, because the production mixer will never be able to get usable sound unless they have the full cooperation of the rest of the crew, and including the director, which doesn't always happen. But that all being said, it is down to post-production. We have to sort it out in the end. And dialogue mixing and dialogue sound editing is a very, very important job. My daughter's a supervising dialogue editor, and the work she will put into preparing every single syllable that has been uttered, if need be, to make it intelligible and usable is amazing. And I have been doing that for years in the dubbing theatre as well, before we could do it all digitally. It was just doing everything from just lifting one syllable, or adding a T where a T was missing out of a word, or another consonant, that sort of thing, pitching the voice up or down to make them speak higher or lower, making gaps in their deliveries if they were off screen, so that the line makes intelligible sense. There's a vast amount of work that's on there, and it is highly skilled. And maybe there's not enough time or enough highly skilled people employed sometimes these days. As far as movies are concerned, there's just the possibility of making extremely loud soundtracks. And the big problem that has always existed is that the director and everybody else on the movie knows all the lines. And once you know them, you can't unknow them. And you can't tell whether they're intelligible. And when I'm teaching at the film school, which we do quite a lot, we have first-time viewers to come in and review, and we ask them to pick particularly the dialogue lines or dialogue plot points that they didn't pick up, and then we pay particular attention to that. We don't have, I can't remember us doing much of that when we were making movies, with the exception of James Cameron, who on Aliens, when we'd mix the reel, we would turn the theatre level down and sit and listen to it again, and any lines that were being lost because it was played at a lower level, we'd go back in and tweak up a bit or fix. But he was the only one who went that far. I wish a lot more people did.
Yeah, it seems like perhaps the focus has gone off that particular part of the post-production. Of course, projects are suffering because of that sort of almost lost art, really, it seems, in the TV side of it.
On top of that, there is a very frustrating thing from some directors who say, I don't care if they understand that or not. Well, that's crazy, because as soon as you're sitting in the cinema and you don't understand it, you might even turn to your neighbor and say, what did they say? You've lost it. The film has lost it. They've lost you.
Yeah.
You don't want that. And you don't know whether the director wants you to understand it or not, because there's no indication.
So after working on the first 4 Bond films, after Thunderball, Pinewood's taking you different directions of other films, but you come back to Bond for the Live and Let Die, and again,
Yes.
kind of, is that luck of the draw, or people requesting you at a certain point?
No. I mean, on Live and Let Die, I was by then as a re-recording mixer, dubbing mixer, as we were called then, in one of the theatres at Pinewood. The films were mixed by 3 mixers on a console. There's the chief dubbing mixer and there are 2 effects mixers who would share all the sound effects, footsteps, everything else other than dialogue or music. But in those days, we had to pre-mix everything. We had to pre-mix. I mean, when you talk of a Bond film, there are hundreds of tracks. You can't put up hundreds of tracks all at once, or we couldn't in those days. So we would narrow them down. We make a pre-mix of the guns. We make a pre-mix of the boats. We'd make a pre-mix of the planes, the horses. We'd make all those pre-mixes, and all three of us would sit at the console, sharing out all those soundtracks and make the premixes. And we made the premixes in what we thought they would sound like at the right level and sounding right as we thought they might appear in the final mix. So the three of us did that. And then when we came to mix all those together, as I said, the chief sound mixer played the dialogue, which he or she had already pre-mixed to make them sound pretty good. The music, which had probably only just arrived, and all the sound effects premixes that we'd spent some time making. Now, my first Bond on, as you say, Live and Let Die, was it?
Yeah.
I was one of the effects mixers on that. So one of a team of three who never got a credit in those days, and I was like that through. Well, all of the next Bond movies without a credit. I think the first credit I got was Moonraker.
And Norman's just said. Sorry to interrupt, Graham. Norman's just asked if he can come back on for a couple of minutes. Just going to bring him back on.
Sure.
So,
why not?
Okay, so hopefully he'll pop up in a moment. Okay, let's get him to start his audio and video again. Okay, 1 moment.
There we are.
Hi, Norm.
I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed listening to Graham. It's brought back a million memories, Graham. I thought you deserved just one little story, because I even though I worked in the game on the sound side for a long time, I always absolutely admired mixing sound and recording sound. If you haven't been involved in it, you don't know how to do it. And there was just one little story I thought it would interest you, was that in Goldfinger, one of the great scenes for me was, of course, the crushing of the car in the crushing machine, and the sound that came back for that was very, very limited. A bit of this and a bit of that and the other, and so I had to compile it all myself. But the one thing I was missing, I was confident I was going to do quite a good job, but the one thing I was missing was the sound of these great big side pieces coming up and down and up and down. And I knew they were the most important sound of all, because they were the ones that were actually crushing this damn car. And I was very, very worried. And as you know, you search and search. I looked for machines. Nobody had anything. And one day, quite by chance, I said to my assistant, "What's that going on outside?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a few tradesmen on the car park. They're doing some maintenance there." I said, "Yeah, but listen to that sound. It's going good." And I rushed out and I saw these guys there, and I said, "Don't go anywhere, just stay where you are." I didn't know what the machine was. And I rushed back to Dudley Messenger. I said, "Dudley, I have found the sound I've been searching for weeks. Please come and record it." He said, "I'm sorry, Norm, but we're on the set. I'll be here for the rest of the day." I said, "You are kidding." He said, No, I'm serious. I cannot come." I said, "Well, give me a machine." He said, "But I haven't got another one." I said, "Well, what's that down there?" He said, "Oh, no, that's just a toy I bought for my kid." I said, a toy recorder? Does it record?" He said, "Well, I guess it records." "Yeah." I said, "Well, give it to me." And I took it out there, and the microphone was about 2 inches high. I tried to make the guys think I was a real professional, and I held out this little tiny thing there, and they went through the procedure. And I realized I had recorded this very important sound on a toy. So when it came to the big mix, I didn't say anything. I just said special sound for, we did a premix, of course, just to do the car crushing. And I just put on the chart further sound for the claws, the side claws. And, you know, to this day, I never, ever told anybody that that was recorded on a toy. And I stood there and I was trembling as they started to mix, and nobody said anything. And I thought, oh, my God, they've accepted it for what it is. And I thought you would enjoy that, because that's the world of sound. It's,
indeed. You can never tell. Well done.
But I've enjoyed your everything you've told me, and all the pre-mixing and stuff. Yeah, that was the world we lived in. Yeah. Well done anyway. Nice to
nice story. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm glad for sharing it after all these years.
Yes. You're the only one that knows, I think.
I won't tell anyone.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Norm. I'll put you back in the.
Okay.
Right. Okay. See you later, Norm. Okay. There we are. Yeah, it's a great story, that one. Even as Bond fan, almost 60, you know, well, 20 odd years, you've always learned something new. So that's the great part of being a fan of something. We were just about to touch on to Moonraker.
All right. Yeah, I mean that was the first film I said I'd worked on. I was still one of the effects mixers then. I can't remember exactly which was the first one I was the chief mixer. Was it Roger Moore one? Can't remember.
I imagine it would be, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Moonraker. They were very formulaic. The Bond films. Quite often, I mean, the Broccolis were very loyal. Quite often with the same crews, maybe the same editors, the same sound editors, and quite often the same production sound crew. And it was very formulaic. We knew what they wanted. They wanted the same as last time, you know, and we did it. Cubby was very generous with the time and looking after us, feeding us well, giving us with parties. Cubby was wonderful at involving the unit. I was one of the very first ones I worked on, and he was standing at the entrance to the restaurant where the party was, and greeting everybody. And he said, "Hello, Graham." And I thought, what? How does he know me? But in fairness, maybe he was being prompted as we were coming along the corridor. I don't know. But it just shows the man he was, that he felt it important to know everybody's name.
And I imagine the Bond films being, you know, very much like a family. You said Carry-Ons were like a family as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I assume that therefore those two groups of pictures are perhaps, you know, the best environments that you've worked in. Well,
of course they were. I mean, I don't know how there were 31 Carry-Ons or something, were there, and how many Bonds now? So yeah, and they were, you know, they were just Pinewood, weren't they? They were just Pinewood. that was what we did, and it's not just me. All the staff at Pinewood will have the similar recollections of working on both of those series.
Yeah. One of my favourite Bond films is Man with the Golden Gun. I don't know
right.
specific that one.
Yeah, it's the Man with the Golden Gun. That was again formulaic. We knew what was expected. The sound effects, as ever, were well prepared, but beautifully prepared. and we would go through and mix according to the Bond formula. You know, there was never any interruption or interference by directors or anything. We would hardly ever see. Well, the directors just let us get on with it, you know, and Cubby and Barbara later let us get on with it. In fact, there was in a later one, and I won't name any names, but there was a director who was getting particularly difficult at the dubbing theatre, and Barbara came in and said, just leave them alone, let them get on with it, they know what they're doing.
So it sounds like a producer looking after everybody, and
Yeah.
So from the main job of the recording mixer is essentially more to sort of take sound effects that have all been created by the sound men, sort of replacing things as you go. Would you have actually had to at any time in your career actually create sounds, or was it more sort of putting them together in the right place and that sort of thing?
Well, creating sound, I mean, as a bit like I said, like we did with the whooshing of Superman, we don't get that much stuff at creating. Although a film I did consider I did a lot of creation on was Aliens, because all the sounds that were presented to me were normal sounds, and I remember I was a bit puzzled at first because you have a cue sheet, which is the name of the soundtrack or what the soundtrack is for. So it would say car or rocket or whatever, you know, and everyone said process. And I began to realize, because I found I had to do it, that that meant me do the processing, which is obviously done by sound designers digitally these days quite normally. But these were normal sounds that arrived in the dubbing theatre. And we had a digital processor called a Publisong, which could change pitch and speed things up, slow things down, and change the sound and make repeat sounds. And I used that on an awful lot of those ordinary sound effects on Aliens. I'll give you a typical example where if I can remember when something is docking in the enormous spaceship and there's a big metal door that shuts, and I was given clunk for the door to shut. So that's not good enough for me. I pitched it and harmonized it and doubled it up so that instead of waiting clunk on the screen, it went clunk, bang, bonk, and it surrounds as well, so that it sounded like something that the size that it was, with a lot of echo on it, obviously. Again, so that's the sort of creation we did with original sounds. These days, awful lot of that is done by the sound editor, who sometimes call themselves designers, quite rightly, because they actually do that designing digitally before it ever gets into the dubbing theatre. But they are advised to do it and keep the original as well, in case it doesn't work and we have to have another go at it in the dubbing theatre.
So I assume that your role got more complex as the sound evolved from mono to then to surround and you know all different channels we have now.
Indeed, yes. I mean, when I started mixing in the dubbing theatre, it was mono. We recorded three separate tracks: dialogue mono, effects mono, and music mono. And that separation was so that we could make a version afterwards called a foreign version or an international version, which would be the music and the effects minus the dialogue, so that foreign countries could have their own actors dub the sound in their own language, the dialogue. So that was it. We had a mono, but there's no high speed. We had to rehearse 10-minute sections. We had 4 faders each, so there were 12 tracks playing at a time. What levels we were going to play each soundtrack at, we wrote down the equalization that we were going to use on our little cue sheets. We rehearsed probably for a day, almost most of the day, and then we said, "Okay, we ready? Yeah, let's go for it." And we put tape on, and then we'd go for a take, and that's when the adrenaline would start, you know. But especially as a junior mixer who's maybe got one important sound dissolve to do at about 8 minutes in, you know, and if you don't get it right, then oh dear, we'll back up, rewind everything, let's start again and do it all again. So that was that almost performance aspect to mixing in those days. The next thing that came along was that we could actually roll backwards. If we could stop and say, okay, let's go back a bit and pick it up. So then we'd roll back a bit and then drop into the record at a certain point and continue from there. And the next stage was being able to do that at high speed. So we could whiz back at something like 4, 5, 6 times speed and do the same thing and drop in. By this time, we were probably shooting on 2000 rolls for 20 minutes at the time. That was the additional changes that we went through. The technical changes when we moved from Academy Mono, which is a phenomenally restricting sound. It obviously is mono, coming out of one speaker only, and recorded as an optical soundtrack down the side of the film, which had its severe limitations. So we could never put any real bass into anything, no real bass level, bass content. And the high frequencies, we had to put an extra high, emphasized high frequencies in, because there was a filter in the cinema that rolled off all the high frequencies, starting from about 2,000 cycles and being gone completely by 8,000 cycles. And that was to get rid of all the clicks and plops and cracks that happened from optical recording, because every little speck of dirt on an optical soundtrack came out as a crack or a pop. And that was minimized by this filter in the theater. So we would have to put extra high frequencies in everything on the track, so that when it was played back through the filter, you at least heard enough high frequencies. That all changed with the advent of Dolby Stereo, when dear Dr. Ray Dolby got involved with cinema sound, and he invented this system of actually making a stereo soundtrack on an optical down the side of the film on optical, which was 2 tracks, just 2 tracks, but encoded in those 2 tracks was a center track and a surround track, an ambient track behind you. It was a matrix system, which was also had some idiosyncrasies, especially at the beginning of it. And that was the next big change, because it gave us a vast, much improved, because of the Dolby noise reduction in it, much greater dynamic range that we could record on optical. And also it gave us 4 channels to play out of. And that was a great forward leap.
Am I correct in saying that later on in your career, you were quite important to Pinewood's sound department in pushing things in new directions, and you were very much embracing the changes?
Well, yeah, we loved this format, and we spent a lot of time trying to overcome some of its idiosyncrasies that were in the early stages, in as much as channels used to bleed to one another. You would hear a bit of the dialogue out of the surround and that sort of thing. And we tried to invent ways of preventing that happening by stop things bleeding into the surround by pitch shifting and time delays. We spent quite a lot of time doing that. At the same time, Dolby were improving the system. And by the time it moved from Dolby A-type noise reduction to Dolby SR, spectral recording, and which Dr. Ray actually said was the technology he was the most proudest of. He increased the dynamic range even more, and the frequency range, and the less crosstalk, and it was the best thing we had for quite a few years until he pushed the boundary even further and came out with digital sound.
Yeah.
All the way through to the cinema. I should just explain more that everything we did as a magnetic recording suffered depreciation when you copied it to another one. So you pre-mix it, the quality deteriorates, you mix into a final take, and the quality deteriorates. You then master it onto the final master that will go to the laboratories, and the quality deteriorated. And then, of course, the optical process of recording it onto optical sound down the side of the film, and then printing it, and then playing it in the cinema. So what we mixed in the theatre, dubbing theatre, and its prisons very rarely sounded the same to the cinema until Dolby Digital, when we were at last presented that whatever we recorded came back in the cinema, or it didn't come back at all.
So by the time you were getting towards probably the Pierce Brosnan Bond films, by then I assume it was all, so by the 90s we were getting into the digital side of it. And
yes,
yeah,
yes, indeed, yes. I think there was times when there was a mixture of digital and magnetic, and I'm not sure if we were all digital by GoldenEye. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't. But
yeah, it might be in this sort of time.
we were certainly into 5.1 then, I think.
Yeah. So when you say you worked on most of Roger Moore Bond films, a few times with Lewis Gilbert, the director of Spy Love Me and Moonraker. Would Lewis Gilbert have any crossover with Lewis Gilbert at all?
No, Lewis Gilbert was one of those. We did see him come into the dubbing theatre, but he was just a bit like Cubby and Barbara. He just trusted us. I think he didn't have a great deal of input. In fact, I remember when we were doing something that we were particularly keen to get right, and we wanted, their input, and dear Lewis was at the back playing with his new digital watch. But no, the directors, I don't think they were encouraged to have too much. As I say, it was just formulaic. Barbara or Cubby, and later Barbara knew exactly what was needed, and Michael Wilson, they knew what was needed, and we knew what was needed, so we just got on with it.
I mean, with Michael and Barbara, did they have different strengths? Were they different elements of the films that they would each, Michael would do this, Barbara would do that? Was it, or they were always sort of? No,
I think they were a team. Michael was obviously the more legal side of being the producer, and Barbara had probably had a wide range of interests which she'd inherited from her dad, I suspect.
Yeah. And how do you think of I don't know if you've seen the latest Bond films with Daniel Craig, and what you think of them from a sound point of view?
Oh, I think, I have a great deal of respect for Paul Massey, who's an English re-recording mixer who works predominantly in the States. But he's done a great job. He's done a really great job. I've had lunch with him a few times, and when we start talking, we're just so on the same page about how things should be done. And no, it's a great soundtrack, really is. Nothing to complain about there.
Yes, I think No Time to Die in particular has a very good sound. It's very rich from a sound design point of view.
Yes.
I hear that it's just been nominated for I think it's a BAFTA.
Yes.
And quite rightly.
And yeah, and it's in the nominations for our AMPS, which is the Association of Motion Picture Sound. We have our annual Film and Television Awards, Sound Awards, and it was one of the nominations there. So we'll see how that gets on.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Is there, when you approach a larger than life film like Bond or sci-fi film, is there a different style that you employ, or is it you approach every film in the same?
No, it's not every film, it's every scene, every sound. I mean, as I say, I'm teaching at the moment at the National Film School, and I find it extremely easy because they play a sound that they prepared. I say, can I just listen to that sound there? And I hear it. I know exactly what I would have done with it, rightly or wrongly, hopefully more times rightly than wrongly. So I find it very easy. You just see and you analyze what importance that sound has for that shot rather than the scene. Well, there's the greater thing of the scene, which is more to do with the atmospheres, the background, setting the environment of where that scene is taking place. But every shot has a reason. And this takes me back to my early days in the dubbing theatre when we were obviously mixing to film. And one of my earliest jobs, because we have to change the sound on cuts and for other reasons. One of my earliest jobs was to wind through the film on a bench upstairs over a light box and examine every cut and make a cue to it, which was drawing a line, an 18-inch line across the film from one side to the other. So when it projected, like I'll show you here, it would go across like that. And when it reached the edge, that was the cut. And it was always going at the same speed. And I would draw those lines, but you don't obviously want to draw a line on every cut. It would drive you crazy. So it forced me to analyze every cut and think about what I wanted the sound to do on that cut. Now, on a lot of cuts, I don't want it to do anything at all. I mean, if we've got a scene between two people and we're looking at this and we're looking at them and him and her, we don't want the sound to change every time we change the look. We may go over the shoulder, we may go a little wider. We don't want the sound to change on all of those. But when we cut to the next morning or another day or somewhere else, then we do want the sound to change. So that's how I sort of got ingrained into thinking about what do I want to hear on this shot. And then when I got into the theatre, what is the most important sound for that shot? You know, often it's the dialogue, but not necessarily. You know, if somebody's running away and being chased and they drop their gun, the most important sound is the sound of the gun dropping. You know, you just have to analyze story-wise. We're here to emphasize the story. So everything we do has to have that in mind. We're just supplementing the story.
Yeah. The director you would have worked with most on Bond films was John Glenn.
Yes.
You have many memories of John?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen him for a while now, but I do see him from time to time. Nobody's seen anybody for a while now. But yeah, no, I mean, got on very well with John. Like John, he grew up from originally sound editing and into editing and then into directing, which is probably a very good path to follow.
I mean, like, it's a good question. So did you ever want to get away from sound and try editing, or were you very happy?
No, I was really happy, and I considered myself very privileged mixing the final soundtracks, because that is the final creative process for the movie. That's where it all comes together. Nothing changes after that. No. Whatever leaves us goes off to the cinema. And to that end, we have, I mean, part of it, as well as hoping you're making a good soundtrack, is keeping the director happy, who are quite often at a very nervous state at this stage. This is their last creative process. All they can see when we're mixing is all the things they wish they'd done differently or a bit better, gone for another take, or done something else, and we pick up on that, and we reassure them, or we help them if it's really bad, but that's all they can see. And that happens to all of us. When I mix my film and we sit down for a review, and I think, oh, that was not quite right, but you just hope, well, in fact, when you see it again about 18 months later, you don't even notice it, but that's all you can see. Any of us, I'm sure, creatively can see when we're stopped by the clock or the budget, but we would always like to go on a bit further. It's a compromise when you stop, and there's always something you wish you'd done more. You only hope that from everybody, from the scriptwriter onwards, that that when you had to stop, it was as good as it could be in the time.
Was there any project that there was something that you really regretted not being able to do, or?
Not really. No, I don't think so. I was asked to mix the film about Oscar Wilde, but I couldn't do it for, I can't remember what reason now, and I maybe would have liked to have done that, but I mean, I became in the latter years I found it far more satisfying doing dialogue pictures than Crash Bang Wallop pictures, because Crash Bang Wallop pictures is there what you see, but there's so much nuance and storytelling in the dialogue.
But by the time you were on Dine of the Day, your last Bond film, that was such a huge film, and that must have been quite overwhelming, a film of that scale.
Well, yeah, but by that stage, I mean, we had begun to I think we probably instigated it actually, dubbing in 2 theatres at the same time. We had 2 theatres at Pinewood who were right next door to one another, that were almost the same, well, they were the same size and very similarly equipped. And quite a while back, in order to accommodate the Bond schedule, which they always stuck to their schedule. They always had a release date and it had to be done, but quite often the shooting and the special effects went a bit over. So it was decided, I can't remember which was the first one, it was decided that we would make what was effectively a 10-week mixing schedule into 5 weeks by using 2 theatres. It's done quite a lot in the States now. So we have 2 teams. One was pre-mixing dialogue, and the other one was pre-mixing effects, and then there would be pre-mixes of footsteps or anything that was left over to do, and then it all moved into one theatre to do the final mix. So the last couple of Bonds, or maybe 3, I can't remember, we decided to swap over. By now I'm head of department and have quite a lot of other things to do. So instead of me being the lead mixer, my colleague next door, John Hayward, became the lead mixer. So I pre-mixed the dialogues, he pre-mixed the effects, and then it all went into his room to do the final, which was fine because I was quite happy to be doing the dialogues. As I said, I'd really had enough of Crash Bang Wallop by then. So he was the lead mixer on the last few, and after GoldenEye, I guess. Yeah, I was before that. Before that, it was the other way around.
So when you work on the dialogue, would you need to bring actors in to redoing their dialogue, or was it not?
No, that was all handled by the dialogue sound editor. That's all. That would have all been organised beforehand. Yeah, we would quite often be presented with alternatives, the original soundtrack and the ADR, or the post-recorded sound dialogue. And I mean, one of the films, the one that I always found it very satisfying to rescue as much of the original sound as possible, because for many reasons, actors don't like doing ADR. And if you take away the original track, you've got to replace everything and make it real. That makes it in the right sound acoustic, in the right perspective. Everything's got to change, and you've got to add all the footsteps, the movements. You've got to add absolutely everything. But if you can use the original, then most of it is there. Michael Aspel's film. There was a scene that he'd the Bond film he'd ADR'd, re-recorded all the dialogue for, but I worked on the original and saved it, and he was very happy that I did that. Another one, I've been dying another day. Well, oh no, tomorrow never dies. There was a big scene in this big party where James Bond goes down and meets the newspaper magnate, whatever.
Jonathan Price.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's a long scene, and there's dialogue that starts up at the top and goes all the way down to the bottom. And I was given the whole thing in ADR and the whole thing in the original, and I flipped backwards and forwards, sometimes just pinking a word of the ADR that was covered by a noise or something in the original. And I presented John next door with this mixture of dialogue and original dialogue and sync dialogue, and he said it was fine, just went through. But he had all the others in case it didn't, But I did it all in ADR, and I did it all in original, and then I did a mixture of the two, which was what was used.
You said that Michael Apted was a very good director to work on the Was Not Enough. I'm guessing perhaps because he came from a smaller picture environment. So I suppose it was more sort of used to working collaboratively and more hands-on.
Not necessarily. No, I mean he was. He, as you say, he wasn't. He may have been a bit awestruck doing a Bond, but he was. I knew Michael from something else. I can't remember. Well, I knew his son, so so I knew Michael, but we were. He was fine. Good director.
Yeah.
Good film.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favourites. I think good questions come in when you do some work on a film. How much do you have to consider the composer's role in it? Would the composer have any input into the sound design? How does that work?
It's fairly normal for us not to have the composer in the mix, in the final mix. We love composers, but they do have, I would say, a tendency, not all, a tendency to only hear the music, whereas we are presented with the whole story, and the music doesn't tell the whole story on its own. It's there to support, and quite often, to be honest, the best music scores are the ones that you don't notice have happened. They just sat there and manipulated your emotions, and you didn't know it was the music. So that's the best thing. Yeah, I mean, I've got experiences of composers who said, I don't want to hear anything else but the music. And one asked, he said, why do I want to hear anything other than the music? I said, because it's just music. The scene isn't alive. I don't hear anything that I can relate to from what's going on the screen. It was, it wasn't dialogue, obviously. It was just walking around or looks and things. But I said, well, if it's just music, I can't even think I'm there, and I need to think I'm there. Anyway, we did add some effects in that particular one. Excuse me. And then we have music that. One of the big problems that happens is that the editor will quite often put temp music in on a temp mix, and it sometimes works out better than the final music, and that's always a problem. And we have also occasions where that's happened, actually on a Bond film, where the editor has put in Bond music from previous Bond films, and it works so well that the composer just virtually copied it. So that's fine. Very, very shrewd composer. Yeah, it's there are occasions where completely different music has been used, all composed by the composer, but moved into completely different positions.
Yeah.
It's amazing how well that can work, to be honest. Consider they write to picture. It's amazing how well a piece of music will work in another position in the film. And we do this at the film school as well, which is actually an education to the composers who are also students.
Yeah, cool. Would you have encountered John Barry then, who worked on quite a few?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I first encountered John Barry I was at school going to see the John Barry Seven perform in the Adelphi Slough, I think. But when I mentioned that to him, he didn't seem very pleased. I don't know why. But John Barry, I found he got a bit tired of it, I think. Very samey, I thought. And there was this whole battle of not recognizing Monty Norman's theme, not wanting to recognize Monty Norman's classic James Bond theme.
Legal case,
and there were occasions on before I got into the dubbing theatre under films that Gordon McCullum mixed, where they actually said, no, this is not working as well. So they just went to the vaults and got the James Bond theme from an earlier James Bond film, put that in.
Because I suppose John did so many films, he did 11 films altogether, and they were fairly, even some of them were just one every 12 months.
Yes.
What about?
I mean, I was particularly, bless him, Moonraker, I found it, it's so slow, the music. I know you are slow in space, but that seemed to slow it down even more. It might have been, the pace might have been able to have been a bit faster to help the action. But to me, it just slowed it down. It seemed to be like endlessly slow stuff happening in space, because it's a space, there's not much, and it's all happening in slow motion.
Yes, it's very,
and the music seemed to be as well.
It's a very lyrical score, Moonraker.
Yeah,
I agree, and very similar to Out of Africa, that he would do a few years later. Quite a lot of similarities. David Arnold has always been considered to be the successor to John Barry.
Again, he brought revival to it. Again, I think he did a great job. As did most of the others were good. Michael Kamen did quite well.
Do you remember Michael Kamen in particular?
I remember Michael Kamen because of Pink Floyd The Wall. Yes. Right. Yeah, he used to come in when we were mixing Pink Floyd The Wall, because he did all the orchestration stuff for that.
My favourite composers, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and films like that. And of course he left us far too soon, didn't he, Michael? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Do you feel that he was comfortable doing a Bond film like License to Kill? That it was, well, I suppose it was, and that very sort of tone of the Die Hard and Lethal Weapon that he was doing up to that.
Yeah, no, I think that music worked well. I also worked with him on Frankenstein, not Frankenstein, Munchausen. Sorry. Yeah.
Because it's quite a dark film, License to Kill, so I suppose it was quite nice to sort of work on something that was a bit less formulaic, as you mentioned.
Sure, I mean that was deliberate, hardening up of the character and making it a bit more gritty.
Yeah. I had a question.
I'm not sure it came off, but
I think maybe it was perhaps a bit ahead of its time. It was
maybe
to the Daniel Craig era.
Yes.
I had a question come in. Did you ever encounter Maurice Binder?
Yes, we met Maurice. Yeah, I've got obviously any of the Bond do's or anything to do with he was a character, talented character.
Yeah, I think he always had a reputation for having his work kind of last minute.
Oh yes, oh yeah.
not because he was inefficient, but he just didn't want anybody to then cut his stuff, or they couldn't change it if it was last minute.
Yeah, no, he was maybe. I mean, he was perfectionist, that's for sure, and he was always late.
As you mentioned, we were very about on the set with Roger Moore. What was Timothy Dalton like when he came in? Much more serious Bond.
Yeah, he was more serious. I don't think he was perfectly suited for it. Well, he only did 2 out of the 3. Wasn't particularly keen on him as a person.
Perhaps just a bit too serious, or
yeah, he wasn't all that nice a person, I don't think, but maybe it was just, I didn't have much to do with him. This again would have been at Bond parties, probably.
Yeah. I met Jim Dalton very briefly, and it was after an event, and I'd like to get the occasional autograph, sometimes, and he was not that great to
No.
the crowd. He did sign something for me, but he just seemed perhaps a bit dismissive. But
yeah, that would be sum it up. Yes.
It wasn't a bad day then. It was.
No.
There's a couple of people I just wanted to see if they ring a bell with you, Graham. They might not. A gentleman called Otto Snell.
Yes. I mean, Otto was a colleague of mine he was at Pinewood as long as I was. Just maybe a year or 2 longer.
Yeah.
To be honest, and we were both in the dubbing theatre, coming up alongside one another, and Otto became a chief in his own right, dealing more with television, I have to say, probably. But I still talk to him. I still see him.
Oh, good. That's nice. Still going strong. Yeah. And the other person from Rush of Love was Derek Kavanagh.
Derek Kavanagh, yeah, he was a boom operator.
Yeah.
Was he? Yeah, he was on Rush of Love. Yeah, I remember Derek. He went into production, became a production manager, and then a producer, I think. But he was a boom operator when I knew him.
And last name, Harry Miller.
Harry Miller was an extremely talented sound editor, a bit like Norman. Probably preceded Norman a bit.
Yeah.
And preceded my time. I never worked with Harry. I mean, I think he'd retired by the time I got into post-production.
Do you have a favourite Bond that you've worked on, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think probably GoldenEye, because I did 2 or 3 films for Martin Campbell. I liked Martin very much. We got on very well. We had an excellent editor, Terry Rawlings, and I enjoyed that one. That's probably the one I enjoyed most. And it was the last one I was, the lead mixer on. We got nominated for a BAFTA, I think, as well. So.
Yes, very good mix.
Didn't win, but.
I mean, what is your opinion of awards, Graham? Because it seems to be when you get 5 films shortlisted, it's almost like saying which is better, an apple and an orange, and of course they're completely different. Do you take these things seriously?
Yeah, I do. Obviously, since I've been nominated 3 times for Academy Awards. My daughter's won for Bohemian Rhapsody, which I'm very, very proud of.
Wow, great film.
And I actually run the AMPS Film Awards for the Sound Film Awards. So it's obviously it's not always fair. There's always people who feel hard done by, and people who feel, or people that we recognise who maybe have not earned what they've earned. But that's the business, and it is the business. It is very, very important to Americans. If they want to take somebody on in a senior position, the first question is, have you won any Oscars? They take it very, very seriously.
Oh yeah.
And it's great to be part. I'm an Academy member since 1979. So it's been great to be part of that community.
So do you get to help them decide, the shortlists, or How does that?
Oh well, we got to vote. Yeah, we all get to vote. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, very good. You wanted to mention Passage to India.
Yes. Well, that again was a great privilege to work for the great David Lean, which was quite an experience. I mean, I don't think the film was as well received as he might have liked, but it maybe was a little bit old-fashioned, perhaps, and it's certainly the business of casting Alec Guinness with a lot of makeup would not be probably acceptable today. But in respecting David's cinematic prowess and being able to get on well with him and him being pleased with the work and then being nominated for an Oscar for it was very satisfying.
Oh yeah. So just briefly, Graham, you must have seen an awful lot of changes in the film business since when you started up until because you're still obviously active in the industry. Do you think it's a better industry now, or is there certain things that is it a mix, or would you feel like you want to get into it, if you were starting again?
Well, the problem with working in the industry is you work very long hours and it's very stressful. But countering that, it's very satisfying, rewarding, and enjoyable. Otherwise, we wouldn't do the hours. No. I mean, I consider myself very, very fortunate in spending my whole career wanting to go to work. Which not many people can say, I don't think. Yeah. And the other thing is it's just so much variety. You might get stuck on a film that you think, oh, I don't like him, or this is a crap movie or whatever. But while you're working on it, it's the best movie ever, and it'll be over in a while, and you'll be on something completely different with a completely different set of people.
Yeah. I mean, the Bond films aside, is there any films you've worked on that you thought, oh, this is going to be really great, and it isn't, or vice versa? Well,
I mean, there are people who had great helps for Eyes Wide Shut, but I don't think it was the masterpiece that we were waiting for from Stanley, bless him. Yeah. So there was hope for that, it being Stanley and being Stanley's last film, but nothing happened with that really. I think it was a bit. If I have a criticism, well, it's not a criticism because it's Stanley's style, but if I have a problem with Stanley's movies, is that he had this penchant for editing to existing music. So consequently, his edited story took the speed of the music rather than the other way around. The editing should be for the story, and then the music should be composed to fit it. But that was Stanley's way, so who knows? It may be a sleeper. Maybe they're all classics.
He must be quite an interesting person to work with Stanley Kubrick.
He certainly was. I mean, if Stanley accepts you after grilling you and interviewing you and working with you for a day or two, if you're still there on day 3 or 4, I think you're there forever then. But no, I mean, films, obviously a big thing in my life. The first big film that I got to be the chief mixer on Blade Runner was, couldn't ask for any more. I mean, it's a classic. I think it's a great movie, and I'm very proud of the soundtrack.
Yeah, what a film that is. Yeah, yeah. I think it's such an amazing film, the Blade Runner, isn't it? There was one other film I wanted to mention. You mentioned, so what was working with Ridley Scott like on, because you worked with him on a couple of occasions?
Ridley was a hard taskmaster, but he knew what he wanted. And most of the time he was right. As opposed to James Cameron was just about right all of the time. Bless him. No, Ridley was right most of the time. He did want everything loud. We had to fight against that. But the other thing about what used to happen is he was a great one for serendipity. If we had any if things happened by accident and he loved them, then they were in the movie. Sound things. I mean, I could just reiterate the one at the beginning of Blade Runner where there's where Leon's being interrogated in the police station. We had set up in there like a delayed special tannoy effect with slap, delayed on it for the tannoy announcements. And while I was mixing, somehow or other I pressed the wrong button and I got the delays coming in on the main dialogue. I really loved it. So we kept that in. We put the delay on the original dialogue. Those happy accidents would happen.
Yeah.
Another one was, what was another one? Something else that was an accident that happened, and it stayed in. Oh, on Thelma and Louise, when the tankers get shot up, Hans's music is doing this percussive and American guitar, sort of Western guitar. And I'm just listening to, I got these on separate tracks from Hans Zimmer, and I'm just keying these different tracks in and out to see what's on them, and equalize them, make them sound nice. I'm keying them in and out, and Ridley sat in the back and said, "That's great." I said, what's great? And he said, "What you just did." And I didn't know what I'd just done. I'd just been keying them on and off randomly. So I said, "Oh, okay." So I went back and I went forwards again, and I keyed the percussion in and out on rhythm and on cuts, in and out. And I said, "Is that it?" He said, "Yeah, it's great." And it stayed that way. So cut to much later, again, back to AMPS, the Association of Motion Picture Sound. I used to organize screenings, and I managed to organize a screening of Thelma and Louise for the membership and got Hans to come down and talk to us.
Oh, wow.
And that's the first time he saw the mix, and the film finished, and he turned to me and said, what happened to the percussion in the tank? And I explained to him what happened, and he said, "Oh, well, that's fine. That's why I give him the separate stuff to play with."
One thing I did want to mention was The Magnificent Two with Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise. Would you have encountered those legends?
Those two?
Yeah.
Eric and Ernie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were, well, Ernie was very serious. Eric was a fun guy. Yeah, basically. That's how I could sum those two up.
Yeah.
But yeah, Eric was quite shy and serious, very serious. But Eric was making fun all the time, making jokes all the time.
Yeah. So was the relationship kind of exactly as you see on the shows, or was it how much of it?
Yeah, but they seemed very close. Yeah, and collaborative, certainly. Not sure their humor translated all that well to the feature film length, but who knows?
Yeah, I suppose comedy in terms of beats and things, it can be difficult. Yeah.
It may be to do with working to an audience as well.
Yeah, certainly. One project you did work on was the new Avengers, an episode you did an episode. I think it's called Medium Rare. Do you remember the new Avengers?
I do. Oh well, I remember. I was just one of the effects mixers on it. They would have been churned out pretty quickly. I mean, we probably mixed them in about 2 or 3 days. An episode, formulaic, obviously. Yeah. Don't remember much about it, to be honest.
Because I assume you much. Because I don't think you did not much TV, and I take.
No.
You wouldn't have liked to because the time restraints and.
Well, it wasn't from not liking to. I was working in one of the big film theatres at Pinewood. We had smaller theatres for doing TV, and I never really worked in there.
The last person I wanted to mention was somebody that I've interviewed a couple of times, Vernon Messenger. Oh yes, Vernon. He lives just down the road from me. I see him quite a lot. And we go back a long way. And he comes along to our Sprocketeers. I usually give him a lift. I've got to come up and see him hopefully in a few weeks' time and finish up on a project we're doing. But
how are you doing that? Is he coming online? No, he doesn't do tech. He doesn't do.
But my original idea was to either do something on the phone or this, and he, wasn't keen on that idea. But so he very kindly said, come up to my house and we'll record an interview. I've got a HD camera and tripod and everything, and we recorded most of an interview together about his career, and looking forward to finishing that hopefully in the near future. So,
well, he's a real film buff. He never stops buying DVDs and Blu-rays, and he's got a little cinema set up in his home.
He was kind enough to show me a couple of film clips on his cinema, and yes, it's a very I'm not sure if the neighbours like it or not, but it's we all would love to have something like that. And because I think also Colin Miller, you've worked.
Yeah, no, Colin very well. Yes. Yeah. Are you going to do something with him?
I've done audio interviews with Colin.
Right.
Maybe to do something like this as yet, but I would.
Well, yeah, he was heavily involved in Bond films.
Yeah, and it seems to be quite lucky to work with these very talented but also very lovely people as well, and
sure.
There doesn't seem to be many people in the business that, well, assuming if there were people that didn't, play nicely, they wouldn't last very long, because you need to have that kind of very intimate, very efficient relationship to do these things, really.
Yes, very much. It's very much a people business, and that also applies to it applied to a certain extent as a permanent member of Pinewood, because sometimes directors would come back for me or my crew or another crew. So it's personal as far as that's concerned, but it also is very much a people business. You've got to be on the same wavelength, or got to be you've got to be able to fully understand where they're coming from and get on with them.
Absolutely. My penultimate question was, I just wanted to ask, what was your biggest challenge of your career?
Biggest challenge?
Yeah.
Well, funny enough, this came up when something the other day. I mean, it's a technical challenge, really, which is a bit difficult to explain without being too technical. But I mentioned about original Academy mono recordings on optical, which are severely restricting in both dynamic range and frequency response. Now, on Full Metal Jacket, Stanley had decided to go Academy mono on that film. Now, I didn't mix the original film. I mixed 5 foreign language versions of it. And Stanley had this insistence that his films were mixed with the dynamic range even lower. So we had to pull the theatre sound down 2 dBs. He insisted on that. I was warned, fortunately, before I started, and so I did it. Excuse me. So I'm faced with a very rich recording for recordings done in a foreign country of Lee Ermey's rant in the bunk room, isn't it? Where he screams his head off at these soldiers, and trying to contain that in the limited range of dynamics and frequency, and make it sound like he really was screaming, with it all turned down in level as well. That was very, very difficult, because if you go a little bit too far, you distort on the optical track. So it had to be this fine line between getting the absolute maximum anger and performance contained, and that was one of the hardest technical things I had to do. But I don't think, I'm trying to think of any other horrible things I had to do. I don't think so. As I say, I enjoyed every day.
Okay, wonderful. I've got a last audience question just regarding 3D films, whether you would have liked to work on those, or what your opinion is on it, because I think there was big promise, wasn't there, about 10 years ago that everything was, 3D films in cinemas, and now it seems to have all sort of faded out. Do you have an opinion on 3D?
I do, yes. I mean, I think it's the part of the problem is the false 3D that they made. I can't remember their real details, but Walter Murch wrote a lot about actually what physically looking at that stuff does for you, as opposed to looking at stuff in reality.
Yeah.
And there's something about having, to me, when I look at them, it doesn't look like 3D. It looks like an actor, and then in another plane, so in the middle background, and another plane, the far background. They look to be in slots to me, rather than maybe there's something that, because we are focusing on a screen at a fixed focus, but in real life, our focus is constantly changing to whatever we want. Anyway, there's something in all that that makes them uncomfortable to look at, I think, and not satisfying, and even give you headaches.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised they didn't last. And I don't miss them.
No, I don't think I do. I mean, I think animations seem to work best with the technology, but yeah, you try to watch The Hobbit or something, and first of all, the film's so long. Yeah, I think it's just a fad, I think. And lastly, Graham, is there any film project or story that I haven't asked you about that you would like to make some comments about? Or
let me think. Well, we've covered the main ones. I guess my highlights of career have been Aliens, or Blade Runner, Aliens, and Passage to India. Pink Floyd The Wall was interesting. That was a very interesting year for me, because obviously the mixer was Pink Floyd's mixer, James Guthrie, because it was like 90% music. But I had, I think, a bit of input into it in the scenes that weren't music, and also getting Pink Floyd music contained, would you believe, within 70mm sound, because they were used to much even bigger sound than that. So that was good, but that was an interesting time, because I was at the time when the BAFTA nominations only had 4 sound nominations. I had 2 of them.
wow.
For Blade Runner and Pink Floyd The Wall. Obviously, I would have rather have won for Blade Runner because I had more input, but there you go.
Well, yeah, there's anything else you want to add, Graham? I'm very happy to end it there. I think we've had a great conversation.
Well, I hope it's been of interest to some.
Oh yeah, it's been very fascinating to me, and I'm sure my audience have enjoyed it. And also want to thank Norman for joining us as well and sharing his wonderful.
Indeed, yeah.
It's nice to see him. And
good.
So yeah, thanks so much, Ben, for a wonderful evening. And hopefully we'll talk again sometime down the line.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, Philip. Bye-bye, Norman. See you.
Bye.
Bye.